Welcome, everyone. I hope everyone is able to hear me. We're very excited to have you all here to launch the country profiles for Ghana and Nigeria. We're very pleased to have Ifeoma from the Clean Tech Hub in Nigeria. We'll be moderating this call, as well as several very experienced and knowledgeable folks from both Ghana and Nigeria. We at IAMDA are very pleased to be able to support this kind of initiative and to bring it out. And we're very happy for this coming out. I'll share my slides here to support Ifeoma. Please, in the chat, feel free to introduce yourselves, drop any kind of questions or comments, and then I will hand over to Ifeoma.
Thank you, Tom, and welcome everyone. My name is Ife Malo, and I'm a co-founder for Clean Tech Hub, a hub that does work across the sub-region in West Africa. I want to welcome all of you to the West African country profiles presentation on e-mobility. Our presentation and this data is focused mainly on Ghana and Nigeria. Next slide, Tom. And to start off with, in Ghana, you can see that even though regionally, I think the e-mobility space has really sort of taken off, but there is a push for policy and in Ghana that is now being implemented, but not in the sort of speed, with the sort of speed that is expected for it to be implemented. The cost of electricity in Ghana remains very low, but so is the cost of petrol comparatively. And this is a challenge when we are talking about e-mobility, because these are some of the factors that actually can help with driving e-mobility if where comparatively people compare the cost of petrol and switching to electric mobility options. There are very few private sector companies in the space in Ghana, and the total raise in Ghana for the e-mobility space are in the low millions. The Ghana grid is 2/3 gas and oil, but we see hydroelectric also taking off in that sector. So all in all, we see that there is some concerted push when it comes to policy. There's a comparative advantage when it comes to energy costs. Private sector participation is very low when it comes to the e-mobility space. And the environment for e-mobility to really take off in Ghana continues to look promising, but still needs a bit of work. Now we move over to Nigeria. Nigeria is a major oil producer on the continent, but faces significant policy blockages when it comes to e-mobility. This includes, we have a very highly subsidized petrol system, and it's among the cheapest in Africa. But despite that, there's at least 10 e-mobility companies in Nigeria who have raised cumulatively over $10 million. And while this is promising, we still have a lot of challenges and blockages when it comes to renewable energy generation, which continues to remain low, but with a lot of activity on the mini grid sector, which continues to give a lot of promise for a positive outlook in the next 5 to 7 years. So all in all, next slide. All in all, we can see the two charts on the screen. And when you put them side by side, you see that on the policy end, Ghana is doing a lot better. They have a policy in place. Implementation continues to be a challenge, while Nigeria, in terms of policy, hasn't still gotten off the ramps with that one. In terms of energy costs, Nigeria's energy costs continues to remain very poor, very low. And private sector participation, Nigeria seems to be doing a lot better in terms of the number of e-mobility companies and the amounts of investments that they're able to attract. And when it comes to the environment, in terms of doing business, you see that both countries continue to remain comparatively on the same trend in terms of being able to attract more businesses and new businesses. So that's the end of the presentation.
I think we could go ahead and get some panelist feedback and maybe do a round of intros and feedback.
Okay. All right. Okay, then let's get into the panel sessions right away. On our panel today, we have 4 persons on our panel. And I'm going to ask them to please turn on their cameras if they're already on. We have Bernard Ajay from Impact Hub Accra. Bernard, can you say hello if you're online?
Hi, everyone. Bernard here.
Thank you. Welcome. Then we go on to Adedayo Dunlami of EFTD. Adedayo, are you here? Please, can you turn on your camera and say hello? Do we have Adedayo?
Hi. Yes. Sorry, my mute was still on. Hi, everybody. It's really good to be here. Cameras on, ready to go.
Thank you. Frank Kern of Solar Taxi. Frank, are you here? Can you say hello?
Yeah, hi, everybody. My name is Frank from Solar Taxi, as you mentioned. Great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bernard, Adedayo, and Frank for being with us. My first few questions is to all of you. What is your first impression on these policies, on the country presentation, country profiles that we just presented? What is your first take as entrepreneurs operating in this space? I'll start with you, Bernard.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Bernard. I am a project manager for the electric cargo bike project happening in Accra, being implemented by Impact Hub Accra and our partner, Siemens Stiftung, who is in Germany. So this particular spotlight that has been done is fair based on some of the experiences that we've had in the country. I agree with the policy that we are trying to shape up for more policy in Ghana in terms of electric mobility, but then the implementation for that is slow. And then there's also a bit of less private sector involvement as well, because we are now gaining momentum to be able to support the public sector, to be able to give the electric mobility environment, which is already shaping up well. Then you've covered that as well in the country. So yes, I'll say it's a fair analysis of what's happening currently. And then it also speaks to some of the work that even as an institution, as Impact Hub Accra, and then some of the other works that we know happening in the environment is currently trying to shape and change. So those are my initial comments on it.
Thank you very much, Bernard. What about you, Chendu? What are your initial impressions? Sorry, Adedayo, can we hear from you? What are your own initial impressions?
Hi, everybody. Adedayo here, Adedayo Dunlami from EFTD, a logistic startup in Lagos, Nigeria. So we're in the e-mobility space too, and I mean, it's great to see everybody in this space here too. I mean, off the top of my head, the policy is a true reflection of what exactly it is we have going on in this region of the continent, that's West Africa. I mean, we can see that Ghana has taken very good steps in trying to put up policies that would help adoption process and push EV more into our space. Well, in Nigeria, I'm here. It's beginning to take off too. Hopefully in a few years, 2 to 3 years, we're able to find ourselves somewhere halfway through that star grading there. I mean, and in terms of the private sector, that's currently where it is I find myself. We're having so much activities going on in Nigeria here. We have Max doing really good things here. We have GIG and Jet Motors doing good stuff. So, I mean, it's something that is taking off, But hopefully with all that we're going to be able to discuss, we can give good feedback to policymakers and continue to. It's good that in this part of the continent, the Western side, we have Ghana and Nigeria really pushing adoption and policies to help usher the e-mobility sector into new frontiers. So I'm sure by the time we're done discussing and running through some of these policies today, it would set as a good foundation and a very good leverage to continue to build.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Adedayo. Frank, we go over to you. What are your initial impressions, the comments about the country profiles?
Okay, thank you very much, Ifeoma. My name is Frank. As I mentioned earlier, I'm the growth and partnership lead here at Solar Taxi. And I believe, yes, it's a fair assessment of the two countries in their presentation. Albeit currently in Ghana, there's a lot of government policy being driven towards the EV space. And in recent times, we've had some meetings with the Energy Commission of Ghana, which is the regulator for energy efficiency and energy competitiveness of products in the market. And there's a lot that needs to be done in that space. So that's an ongoing conversation. However, when you look at the e-mobility tariffs that are being imposed on some levies, currently what we have here, EVs are being branded as luxury vehicles. That is something that is a miscategorization that is also being worked on. So all in all, I feel government policy in Ghana is really moving forward in terms of the adoption of e-mobility. So that is something that we can really look forward to. And I must really commend our Ministry of Transport and then also I think the government policies as a general approach to the country adopting it. So yes, I believe for most of it, yes, the representation has been accurate. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Frank. Thank you. And I'll come back to you in a minute, but I wanted to go back to Adedayo. In your initial comments, you had talked a bit about the private sector, where you see the outlay of the private sector is very reflective of what you think is happening in Nigeria, most likely. My question to you is, are there any challenges? What are the challenges that the private sector or private companies are experiencing now? And what would be, in terms of your recommendations, that you'd want private sector and government to look at in sort of reducing those bottlenecks?
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, some of the problems that we currently experience in Nigeria in this space are quite obvious. It's cast in stone. I mean, we have the grid problem, the power problem. From your initial presentation, I mean, you shared that we're still doing, we still have just 55% access to grid electricity for the whole country. That's really not good. So in terms of what it is that we have to deal with in, take for example, building swap stations, building charging stations, there's still so much that needs to be done in terms of how much power it is we're able to get from the grid. But as a company on our own end, what it is we've been able to do is partner with the IPPs. So IPPs are the independent power producers. We've been able to build our own charging stations and charging swap stations around their infrastructures, their network, and then their feeders. So that has some way helped mitigate the power issues that we currently experience. So I mean, first off, I'm going to say that so much needs to go into providing more power to the grid, from the generators to the transmitters to the distributors. We need to look at that, as government needs to look into that to help with the power problem. I mean, then there's also the government policies, the incentives that, I mean, you would give to some of these e-mobility companies to help them continue to adopt better. There's so much in terms of what startups have to do to be able to access, say, funds, grants, and all of that to help build the ecosystem that we're looking at. So I know that the Nigerian government passed the startup bill last month. So that's also a very good step already. With that, we know that some policies that help startups in the e-mobility space would also take off. Take, for example, the pioneer startups trying to build charging stations, charging networks. So, I mean, we get some sort of rebates in terms of tax and electricity tariffs and all of that stuff. So government policies can also help. And also, like I initially said, access to funds. There's a global recession now, so money has not been easy to come by for startups to be able to, e-mobility startups to be able to take their testing, take their projects to the next level. But I know that there are plans, like I said, also in place by the government to look into this. So all in all, the problems that currently exist as a system holistically in Nigeria is really hinged on how much the government is really going to help push the whole EV adoption thing on our own end here.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much, Adedayo. That's an interesting perspective that you had. I was really struck by the fact that you're partnering with IPPs already to build your own charging station. And what you say about giving incentives and pioneer status, tax incentives and rebates and pioneer status to e-mobility companies will certainly be a lift and a boost to people wanting to get into the industry or those who are wanting to scale in the sector. But I'll turn over to Bernard, because in his opening remarks, he mentioned the partnerships that has helped form the work that they do in this sector. And I'm sort of curious, taking it from where Adedayo stopped, what do you think development partners should be adding to this? Adedayo's point was the private sector is doing a lot. The government needs to come in and support. But then what is the space for the development sector in driving e-mobility? What should they be looking at, and how should they catalyze that funding that can come from their side? Bernard?
Yes. So I'll touch on two things and sort of intertwine both in it. So for the development sectors, first of all, they have a lot of push and some sort of muzzle to solve what we discussed in our opening statement with regards to implementing policy. There's a lot of conversation that has gone on in Ghana with regards to policy around electric mobility, but how quickly can we implement these policies? How quickly can we come together in a form of a team to make sure that this happens? And this is where the development partners really come in to give that sort of push that we need to make sure that a lot of things happen much faster, to be able to meet up with the disruptive nature of, in a positive way, the disruptive nature of the work that we're currently doing in the electric mobility space here in Ghana. So one typical example, as an institution, Impact Hub Accra, last week, we just launched what we call the Net Zero Accra, which is a convening of different private sector players and public sector players as well that come together to form the current electric mobility ecosystem that we have. So some of the questions and some of the things that we are trying to achieve with that is, how can we come together to be able to quickly implement some of these policies that already exist? How can we come together to be able to lead some of these developmental partners to be able to fill the gaps that currently exist within the electric mobility space? And even what are the gaps that exist that is sort of causing a bottleneck for implementation of policy and giving private sector players the push and opportunity to be able to influence the particular environment and space that we have. So we had a massive turnaround. We had over 120 stakeholders who RSVP'd their interest to join us for the event, and also going forward to be able to help us form these working groups that will focus on different areas of the industry that we're targeting, especially in terms of shared charging infrastructure, because that looks like one of the bigger issues. And maybe Solar Taxi could speak more on that, because they are like actively on the ground and we are trying to shape policy as well. With regards to shared charging infrastructure that the government already has made some availability and some work already in the pipeline that they are trying to deploy to make sure that together from the private sector and the work we're doing at Net Zero, we could tap into. Yeah, so those are my remarks with regards to the space. And I feel like with this net zero being established in Ghana for all private sector players and bringing together the whole ecosystem, we're able to push some of these things faster and then deploy quickly.
Wow, thank you, Bernard, and congrats on launching the Net Zero Accra. That's really innovative. And we'll be looking at that for more examples of what can work when it comes to driving e-mobility. If you have questions, we see a few questions already on the chat. I'm just going to go back to Frank before I come back to the questions, but please keep putting your questions in the chat and we'll come back to them in about 5 minutes. No, so Frank, we come to you, and my question to you is, you know, there's been a lot of call from your colleagues on what government should do and how government can work to catalyze this sector. When we're listening to Adedayo, he talked a lot about building up an ecosystem, helping with incentives and tax rebates. And Bernard takes it further and talks about a public-private partnership to implement policies and close the gaps. In your own sense, what do you think government roles should be in the sub-region to drive e-mobility going forward? What's been done and what do you think should be the plan going forward?
Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, I believe that the government of Ghana currently is very much poised into a digitization strategy, and that strategy, part of it translates into the e-mobility space, and that has had some positive impact in the space. However, there's still much more to be done, and I also believe that public-private partnership is one of the key areas to drive such policy, albeit because it has the potential to have all the goals aligned, because there have been instances where government sits in one corner and then comes out with a policy that may not necessarily reflect what the situation is on the ground, or the private sector might also engage in some kind of activity or some kind of project that may not necessarily be in line with what government has envisaged for the time being. Also, we also know that governments have limited resources and funds, so there are times that such limited resources need to be strategically and methodically placed for that all these goals to come to pass. So I believe that, yes, a government partnership is something that goes a long way to achieve that. Now, the question will be what partnerships in particular, right? So we are looking at investments in R&D, we are looking at creating in terms of creating an ecosystem where private businesses flourish. So tax incentives, so tax cuts for some of these projects, government ensuring that the macroeconomic factors are doing so well, because we have situations where currently in Ghana, our inflation is not doing so well. What it means is that for businesses that are trying to invest so much in R&D, we know R&D pays forward, even though you make the cost now. So that becomes extra expensive to undertake, and then that also leads to less and less entrance into the ecosystem. So yes, government making sure that the macroeconomic factors are doing well enough to give the conducive environment for the private players, and then also government coming on hand with the private players to come together, form policy, which is being done in Ghana a lot of times. Recently, we had the Ghana Digital Economy meeting. It was a public-private partnership project funded, which was organized by the Ministry of Information, and there's one of many that we expect to see in the space that is going to help lead the charge and then create a better ecosystem for all involved.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for that, Frank. I mean, that's really insightful. I want to push back again and ask you another question. So Solar Taxi, when you look at your growth over the past, say, two years, what encourages you for the next 5?
Right. So for us here at Solar Taxi, we've always had a very unique approach to solving the problem of climate change right here in Ghana, and that has been our singular driving focus, albeit we are an existing business. So yes, there's a profitability of it that has to be looked at. But however, we are looking at it this way. How do we move from our current emission reduction strategies to a strategy where there is also a cost reduction element, because people need to be convinced that going green is cheaper and it's cleaner, not just cleaner for the environment. Even though people do care about green, they also care about their cost reduction strategies. So we make sure that the solutions that we are implementing are not only helping the environment, but also reducing the costs that are accrued to our customers and to the public at large. So that is one thing that we've done that has made us come this far. We're also looking at setting up local content for the infrastructure project that we are undertaking. So setting up the manufacturing plants right here in Ghana, making sure that that in itself leads to a reduced cost, leads to labor involvement. So all these things come together and then bring a sense of belongingness, reducing costs, reducing CO2 emissions. And then that is something that we are looking to drive us into the future. So for the next 5 years, we are actually anticipating to have very massive growth in terms of adoption of EVs in Ghana, in the sub-region, in Africa, not only based on reducing the CO2 emissions, but also understanding that it's cheaper to go green.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Frank. I'm quickly going to go to some of the questions that I see on the chat. The other question is from, okay, Sumaya is asking, where can we access the country profiles? I think Tom had put a link, but maybe Tom, maybe you can put the link again so that people who are joining in late can get access to it.
No problem. Sorry, I'm also happy to quickly answer that. Sorry, if you question about kind of imports. So we do have in the country profiles our own estimate, but right now I'm sure folks, especially from EFTD and Solar Taxi, can share, but there's not really a strong registration system in either country for registering the imports. But I think it's something that people are working on for sure.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, we have another question from Anthony B. He's asking Adedayo, when you mentioned grid infrastructure, are you pointing to renewable energy or another way? Adedayo, do you want to take that very quickly?
Okay. When I say grid infrastructure, I mean I'm still talking about the major way of us getting power on the grid. I think right now is gas and we're looking at just doing a bit of hydro electricity there. But I mean, beyond that, renewable energy, currently there are infrastructures already built around EV stations in 3 different parts of Nigeria. In universities, 100% solar generating systems, one at the Usman Danfodio University in Sokoto. There's one at the University of Lagos in, University of Lagos. And I think there's also one at University of Nsukka, UNN. So these 3 major current infrastructures that we have that exist in Nigeria are currently being powered by solar. So I mean, it's both ways. We're still looking at the grid and other forms of renewable energies.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that. We'll go over to 2 other questions. Chinazom is asking if there's any data for market sizing for West Africa or Sub-Saharan Africa on e-mobility. And then Sumaya wants to know what's the current electricity tariffs that EVs are being charged in Ghana and Nigeria. So on the tariff question, can I encourage Bernard to answer that? Was it Bernard who talked about tariffs, or was it Frank? I can't remember who, but one of you talked about tariffs.
Yes, I did speak about tariffs. So currently what we have is the regime is that the tariff regime has to do with, so in Ghana, it's a luxury tax on luxury duty on e-mobility vehicles. However, as I mentioned, we've had some conversations with the Ghana Customs Authority, and there are certain waivers that are applicable based on the specifications of the EVs that are being brought in. So whether they are semi-knocked down, whether they are completely knocked down, whether they are only parts. So it's on a case-by-case basis as it stands now. So we are working to ensure that it's something that is more structured, and then it doesn't have to be per application, but it will just be as and when you bring it in, then there will be a criteria that will qualify you. So for now, you can't really say for sure what percentage is being applied. Is on a case-by-case basis. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much, Frank. Tom, do you want to take the question on data for market sizing for West Africa for e-mobility?
Sure, yeah. So getting the kind of data around the number of vehicles on the road is not always easy. So we use some estimates from the global safety reports using data from Ministry of Transportation and so on, and that's within the e-mobility profile. So at the very least, we have numbers on the number of four-wheelers, the number of two- and three-wheelers, meaning, you know, Okadas and kekes, as well as buses. And so at least we have a broad idea, you know, that there's probably around at least 8 million motorcycles in Nigeria, for example. And taking into account electrification and urbanization will also help people in kind of creating their own adjustable market estimates, which I know is always key for investors. But in order to explain that, I think sometimes people can use their own methods. It's something that I will be looking at as well. But at least we have a broad idea of how many vehicles are on the road. There's some projections that will be coming out soon also through some IMD partners, and we'll have a better idea of, you know, what is the addressable market and what will be the projections and for the next 10, 15 years. These questions from Yusuf Sani, where he's asking that Nigeria is pointing out that Nigeria is building one of the largest refineries in Africa. Transportation is the largest guzzler of fuel in Nigeria. So Yusuf is asking whether we ever see EVs becoming mainstream in Nigeria, especially for commercial transportation. So I would kick that question over to back to Adedayo.
I mean, it's difficult to say. There are two valid points that he has pointed out there. The fact that we're building a very huge refinery, biggest on the continent, and also the amount of people that need transportation daily in Nigeria. It's difficult to say, but I mean, we have to start at some point, because we should also know that the amount of people that have to commute with two-wheelers, three-wheelers contribute so much greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. And at some point, I mean, it's just going to become unbearable. There was an article I saw a couple of days back that spoke about this particular issue, how much greenhouse gases are currently being emitted in Nigeria, and what is going to happen, I mean, in another 25 to 30 years if some of these checkers are not put in place. So it's difficult to say how fast the adoption in Nigeria is going to take place. But I mean, it has started, and we can only continue to push for it. I mean, we know it's sustainable. I mean, that we know, and we know that going down the route of still burning fossil fuel and all of that stuff to power transportation and all that stuff, it's not sustainable. So we can only continue to push for the adoption to improve, and it still goes back to all that it is that we have said today about the government policies coming in, the government in itself putting its feet down. I mean, in East Africa, we see some countries already making those type of giant strides. Rwanda is a very good example. So, I mean, at some point, the shift is going to happen, irrespective of how much fuel it is we're producing as a nation or not.
Thank you, Adedayo, and I apologize for that brief interruption. I think I'm going to leave my camera off going forward. So there are a few other questions, and I think some of them are similar. They've already been answered, but I'll just put them out there. I think Brady has asked, in Nigeria, with the low cost of fuel that we see, what are the value propositions with EV? Brady, I'll suggest you read the country profiles. We also have a market research that Clean Technology Hub puts out, so you can actually read that. I think some of your questions will be answered there. There's two other questions that I want to bring forth. One is from Emmanuel Yu, when he asks about innovations in place by existing e-mobility players. And then the second one is considering the end of life of these EVs and the safety concerns on battery disposals, lithium batteries. What steps and what checks are we putting in place to mitigate environmental degradation? Frank, Bernard, any of you want to take those questions?
So when it comes to the innovations that are taking place in the EV, I thought the important stride that we are supposed to take as Ghanaians and also the continent of Africa is forward integration of some of these processes involved. So let's take, for instance, Solar Taxi. We have designed and built a battery lab right here in Accra, Ghana. And what we look forward to doing is we design the battery cells, we put them together, and then we make sure that everything is going well. Now, how this plays into the bigger picture is it reduces the kind of reliance on outside or external help to get the process going faster, because then you're able to innovate more, you're able to iterate and then move forward faster rather than having to depend on maybe external supply. So that is one part of innovation that we might look at, actually having to set up some of these important component building sections right here in Ghana and on the continent.
Okay. Thank you, Frank. Bernard, do you want to add to that? There were two questions. Do you want to add to any of them?
Not entirely, but I think Frank has covered extensively what's happening within the innovation space in Ghana. I know for a fact that a couple of the other actors are also doing a bit of disruptive and innovative work in the space, which they showcase, like a company like Kofa as well, and Mana Mobility, which they showcase on at our Net Zero event as well. So it's gaining good momentum, and it's a great time for us to put everything together to make it work.
Okay. We're almost out of time, but I have to get this question in. And by the way, Bernard, we have John Misingo from Africa Nev, Kenya, who's asking how one can join the Net Zero initiative. So you might want to reach out to him offline. But Sumaya asked a question, and her question is, how is the EV sector in Nigeria partnering or working with mini grids? Adedayo, do you want to take that as our last question?
Okay, like I said, initially we have an MOU currently with an IPP that we have partnered with, and like I said, we're trying to build our infrastructures around what they currently have as their network and their dedicated feeders. So it's something that is still very early. I don't know of currently any other person trying to take this route that we're taking. One of the reasons we're taking this route is because we actually are a logistic company, so it's easy to actually just build an ecosystem around the city of Lagos that we can have the EV, we have our EV system, do a lot of stuff that we need to do. So on using the mini grids, I'm not sure anybody has put that into works yet, but I mean it's still early stages. We're trying so many things. I mean nothing is cast in stone yet. We'll continue to iterate, pivot where we need to pivot, work on things that we think, get credible intel from people, work on things that we know need improvement on, and who knows. But currently what it is we are doing as an EV startup here is working with the IPPs and then just building around their own current infrastructures and their dedicated feeders.
Thank you. And if I quickly add to that, there's a lot of MOUs and a lot of contracts that have been signed by some e-mobility providers and some mini-grid developers, particularly Fantastic. In the north. Web tricycles and Okada are the main sources of transportation, and charging stations are then now being built around those mini grid infrastructure to encourage those transportation models. I think the other things they're trying to figure out as they're rolling this out is the sort of payment models and some of the operational kinks, but a lot of that work is already ongoing, Sumaya. Well, I wish we had so much more time. I see a lot of other questions we couldn't get to, but I'm going to hand it over to Tom because we still have a call to action that has to take place. I want to thank our panelists for being present and also for being very generous with their knowledge and with their experience and with their insights into not just this country profile that has been launched, but also a lot of the challenges and opportunities and future projections for the e-mobility in Nigeria and in Ghana. So I thank you, Bernard, Adedayo, and Frank for being here and for your wonderful contributions. I'll pass it on to Tom now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ife. I really, really appreciate it. So I've just shared in the chat this call to action that we've put together, and we have 13 bullet points, and we're not going to go over each individual one in too much detail, but to give you an idea of the broader scope of what we're talking about here, there's a couple of key points, and I would love to hear from our panelists as well, their feedback on this. So to start off with, one of the key things that we're calling for here is that for years now, almost decades, Western countries have been putting forward claims that they would support the Global South for up to $100 billion a year in order to do resilience, mitigation, adaptation work for climate change. And very little of that money has come through. And so first and foremost, we're calling for Western governments, DFIs, investment organizations to put forward grant money, equity money, debt to support startups like EFTD, like Solar Taxi, like so many other wonderful innovators and entrepreneurs that we have here today. So after financing, African governments, we recommend that African governments are able to put together task forces to review current policy. So this was done, for example, in Rwanda. There's a really wonderful example there where they looked at how all of their policies affect e-mobility and came up with a nice slate of policies that they've since been in the process of passing for fiscal policies, for example, reducing import taxes, VAT, and so on, as well as non-fiscal taxes to speed up registration of electric vehicles, and so on and so forth. And then just looking at the whole suite of policies, like I mentioned, is really key. And this is something that we're really calling for here. So I would love to hear from some of our panelists. In the meantime, please, check it out in the chat and add your name to the petition. But from the panelists, maybe we can start off with Frank. I'd love to hear a little bit more from Solar Taxi in Ghana. What are the kind of policies that you all would like to see passed, and how do you see this kind of call for action supporting the ecosystem in Ghana?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. So as you rightly said, it will be very helpful and very engaging to have a lot of these promises that have been made to seeing them come through, and also some of the requirements for some of these so-called grants and then assistance kind of are a bit laborious to comply with, especially considering the landscape that we find ourselves in. So at this part of the world, sometimes some information is difficult to come by, and some of these things could be grounds for not being considered for some of these funding. So I believe that it should be a bit more tailor-made for African businesses and African entrepreneurs to be able to access some of these funds, and then that will go a long way to help us move forward the e-mobility space right here. Thank you. Tom, you're muted.
Thanks. I was going to ask Bernard as well, at Impact Hub, you guys are doing some great work supporting the ecosystem in Ghana. What have you seen support some of your partner companies there, and what else would you ask for?
Yeah, so for us, I think I am there, and this is a good support and praise as well. The fact that there's a lot of research work that has been done in the space, and there's a lot of narrative shaping that's happening currently with companies like Solar Taxi and Coffer and Mana Mobility and all springing up. So what happens, being an institution that usually implements some sort of program which is tied to funding, we realize that the more research that has been done, the more knowledge that exists within the ecosystem, and the more stakeholder play that happens, like what we're doing with the Net Zero and all, the more opportunities it gives to connect startups to some of these funding in a more lenient, if for lack of a better word, way, and the more knowledge that also exists from the donor side that we can support the startups with as an institution like Impact Hub that we work in this space. So those are some of the things that I am noticing, and working with an implementing partner like Siemens Siftun and even from our donor Iki, we've realized that they are getting what we're doing now. They see the need to consistently support, and yeah, the future is bright, if I should put it that way.
That's wonderful. Thanks, Bernard, and thanks for the work you guys are doing over there. Ify, I'd love to also get the view from Clean Tech Hub in Nigeria. You know, how similar is it to what Bernard has noted, and what do you all see as being particularly key to building the ecosystem?
Thanks, Sam. So I think Bernard hit the nail on the head. I think one of the big things is around the innovation is actually putting out data and research. We find that when a lot of the e-mobility companies in our ecosystem want to raise money, one of the things that investors tell them is that they don't have any data about the opportunities that exist with this in Nigeria. And so I think it's important that, you know, we begin to be more active about collecting data and also work with the companies on being able to share data. I find that some companies sometimes are shy about sharing data and information. And without that, we're not able to put out enough information to help investors make an informed decision. I also think, you know, the Nigerian government through the NADDC, the agency that's in charge of the electric mobility space in Nigeria, is very active. I think it has to reach across the aisle to other ecosystems, like the mini grid, for instance, to help to build partnership and infrastructure that is going to help drive electric mobility beyond urban areas, especially in rural and peri-urban areas. And I think that's important because that's where the market really is. That's the population that needs to be able to use this sort of infrastructure. And lastly, I think, you know, we have to, and this is where ADA comes in, you know, as an industry association, they're well placed to help foster collaborations, not just within countries. I would like to see collaborations within Nigeria and Ghana, or with other, you know, West African countries, and see what kind of partnerships and collaborations can help companies scale, whether it's through joint fundraising and investments, or whether it's even collaborating on other sort of, you know, innovative infrastructure sharing models. So those are some of the things that I think are important for us to begin to look at. I think the Nigerian market is ripe for electric mobility. I think despite the question that was asked about the Dangote refinery and this new oil fields that we're finding in Nigeria, I think there's still a conscious effort to decarbonize, and I think electric mobility plays a very important role in that aspect, and everybody recognizes it. So there's a lot of talk going on, despite the chatter around oil and gas, on how do we use electric mobility to mainstream transportation. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Ify. And finally, Adedayo, if you'd like to take us out here with some final comments on the situation in Nigeria and what things look like going from here.
Yeah, so thank you. I think Ify has said it all. She has touched on basically everything it is out that I'd love to give a summary on, from the policymakers, NADDC, the works they currently have ongoing. Hopefully at some point we get the policy, the EV policy passed out, and everybody in the ecosystem can begin to benefit from it. Also, there's so much collaboration that needs to go on, especially in terms of data sharing. People need to have access to data, because data is the driver for everything it is we want to do, from fundraising to deployment of swap station and all of that stuff. So there's so much data collaboration that needs to happen. And I mean, there also needs to be access to grants. Some of the terms and conditions to accessing some of these grants are a bit cumbersome. I think one of the panelists touched on that. I'm not sure who now, but yeah. So I mean, if all of this can be made easier, knowing fully well that, I mean, the continent as a whole is still at adoption stage, it would go a long way in setting up Africa to ushering Africa into the next phase as far as the e-mobility space is concerned. Yeah, so that's it.
Awesome. Thank you, Adedayo. And I'd just like to again thank Ife Malo from the Clean Tech Hub in Lagos for moderating this call, and all of our wonderful panelists. Thank you, everybody, today for your insights, your questions, your comments. I'd love to see the chat blowing up. Very excited to see where we all go from here. Yeah, please, reach out to other people on this chat. Let's keep building this ecosystem and these connections. And Warren and I here from IAMDA, we're always here to talk anything e-mobility in terms of building the ecosystem. And just as a reminder, tomorrow we'll have the final one of these launches for Zambia and Zimbabwe, other side of the continent. We'll be very happy to have you all there. And if we don't see you there, have a wonderful holiday. Cheers, everyone.